I used to work on the north slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half, as polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska. It's situated deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. There's no cell reception and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 in the morning. Not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles an hour. That's when something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket. He was walking down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m., and it was negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. That seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy to keep him inside. It could only have been a few seconds, but after several moments, my buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard, and we're told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if they ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that guy, if he even was a guy. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I used to be an over-the-road truck driver that drove with another guy. This job only lasted a year in total, but within that year I had some strange encounters on the road. One of which was another truck driver that decided to take his shirt off at a fuel lane. He then proceeded to wash himself with windshield wiper fluid during one of my breaks. Despite some of the weird people or off-kilter types, there was one guy that creeped me out more than anyone else. He's one of the main reasons I stopped driving in the first place. The interaction happened at night. We were driving a load down to California set to arrive the next day at night. I had arrived at a rest area in Arkansas at about 3 in the morning, just having finished my drive time and getting set to take my 10-hour break. It was dark, light rain was pouring, and the rest area in particular was down a bit from the highway and completely encircled by trees. That's the perfect spooky atmosphere for the interaction I was to have. I clocked out for the night, did a quick scan around, and hopped out and locked the truck. The rest area was pretty quiet, a few sparse cars in the car parking lot, and a couple of semis that decided to sleep here for the night. An assortment of benches around with some canopies over them to shield from the rain. I was walking to the restroom to take a leak when I saw a man in the dark smoking a cigarette and sitting on one of the benches. Walking past, my anxiety raised a bit, but not enough to set up an alarm, and decided to keep heading to the restroom. Handled my business, washed my hands, and headed back to the truck. The man was still seated in his original spot, but his body language told me he was now watching me. His face was shrouded in shadow due to the overhead light, but his whole body turned as I walked past. Getting slightly paranoid, I picked up the pace back to the truck, hopped inside, and quickly locked the door. Figuring the worst of my anxiety was over, I decided to turn the radio back on to finish one of the comedy shows I was listening to and finish the beef jerky I had bought from earlier. As I raised the jerky up to my mouth, my periphery sensed some movement, and I looked up at the benches for that man. He was no longer sitting at the bench, but was now perched underneath the light post about 10 feet from my truck. My anxiety flooded back and sensed something was off. Something about his posture was bothering me, like I could sense this man didn't have good intentions. I shut the radio off at this moment and stared back. This guy didn't move at all. The shadows covered most of his face, but I could tell he was staring in at me. This stare down felt like it lasted for 10 minutes straight. He didn't even lift his arm to take a drag from his cigarette that was still lit. Feeling like this situation was too strange, I called to my co-driver who was sleeping in the cab. "What, dude?" he said, still waking up. "Hey man, I finished my shift, but there's also this dude staring down me in the truck outside." I hear him move about and peek through the cab curtain. "What dude?" I look back and the dude is gone. I freak out and scan all over, and when I look in the driver's side mirror, the man is now walking slowly towards the back of the truck, cigarette in mouth. "Looks like he's walking around the truck," I say. "Really? What side is he on?" co-driver says, confused. At this point, the dude had circled the back of the truck and is now walking up the passenger side. "He's on the passenger side now," I say. I slid over to the passenger's side and grabbed my knife off the dashboard just in case. My co-driver finally sees him walking up in the passenger side mirror. The guy stops right by the passenger door and starts peering into the lower window of the passenger door. For those that don't know, semis tend to have a window on the lower part of the passenger door, so you can see if any cars are in your blind spot on that side. Considerably freaked, I yelled out, "What the hell do you want?" which made the man leap back and step on his tiptoes to try and peer in to the higher window. He could see me looking at him now. He had to be in his 50s or 60s, skinny man, with bright blue bugged-out eyes. He had a deranged look on his face, like confusion mixed with malice. My co-driver says, "Can we help you?" Upon hearing that there's 2 of us in the truck, the man abruptly straightens up and walks off, leaving both of us as confused as ever. Co-driver threw on his clothes and sat in the driver's side. I recalled my experience with the guy up to that point, and we just sat and watched him. We noticed that every single time a new vehicle arrived, he would walk to whatever light post was closest to the new arrival and stand there. We sat for about 30 minutes debating whether we should call the police, since this guy didn't actually do anything besides acting like a creep. When we finally decided to make a call, we watched the man check his phone, shake his hands in frustration, and sprint back to one of the cars in the car parking lot and peel off into the night. That was the last I had ever saw of him. What confuses me the most is what his intentions were. I was quite bigger than he was. If it came down to an altercation, it's likely that he'd only have the upper hand if he had a weapon. If he had plans to steal the truck, we have logs and GPS coordinates on our truck at all times. Our systems alert our fleet manager if we're driving off when we have no time on our clocks. Plus, what the was this guy doing out at 3:30 a.m. in a shady rest area? My best theory is that rest areas aren't watched very often by police, and this one happened to be out of view due to the tree coverage between the rest area and the highway. This guy seemed to have picked this spot for that particular reason. As for what plans he had after, was it abduction, theft, violence? I'm not clear. I hope I don't meet this creepy lurker ever again. There is a little hot springs nestled near the peak of the Persimmon Pass in central Idaho. Though it is hidden in plain sight and sitting quite literally on the shoulder of the road, it is not a well-known attraction outside of the valley. However, the local ranchers are quite familiar with Barney Hot Springs. It's not unusual to drive by on the weekends and see several families enjoying the water. Barney Hot Springs, or simply Barney's, is incredibly remote, even for Idaho standards. It's at least an hour of driving over rutty dirt roads to the small town of Salmon to the north. If you need a hospital, it's over 2 hours to get to the regional hospital in Idaho Falls to the south. To say you're in the middle of nowhere at Barney's is an understatement, but the seclusion is one of Barney's major drawing points. There's also an odd abundance of tropical fish swimming in the year-round warm waters. You can sit back, relax, and take in the surrounding views of the mighty Rocky Mountains with little in the way of distraction. But Barney's isn't all it seems to be on the surface. An event several decades ago turned this little hot spring from a local retreat to a local nightmare. One autumn afternoon, 2 truckers stopped for fuel at my parents' gas station and cafe in Howe. They were hauling a load of hay over the Persimmon Pass, headed for a delivery point somewhere in Utah. As the truck fueled, the 2 men settled down at the cafe counter and ordered coffees. Sipping his coffee, the older trucker struck up a conversation with my mother and the regulars in the cafe. He seemed a bit on edge, but was normal in comparison to his younger partner. That young man was clearly shaken and didn't say more than a quiet, "Yes, Mom," or "No, Mom," to my mom. He kept his attention on the cup of coffee he cradled in his shaking hands. As the older trucker and the others conversed, he brought up a peculiar event that had happened to them that afternoon. They had crested the Persimmon Pass and were coming down into the little lost valley. As they approached Barney Hot Springs, standing in the middle of the road was what looked to be a child. Bringing the truck to a stop, they soon realized in horror and fascination what was before them. It was not a child, but an odd, humanoid creature. Its body was slim, with long, slender limbs and a squat little torso. The head and eyes were large and amphibian-like. It was not standing any taller than a preschooler. They could see its green skin shimmer in the brilliant midday sun. Dripping with water, it was clutching a large bundle of what could only be described as hundreds of eggs. The creature watched the truck come to a stop, then awkwardly walked over the rest of the road and down an embankment. It was obvious from the trail of water it left behind that it had just come from Barney Hot Springs. On the other side of the road was a small stream hidden in dense willow bushes. No sooner had the creature disappeared, the 2 truckers were driving away as fast as their Cummins engine would take them. My mom and a few regulars at the cafe took in the man's story with silent, somber expressions and comforting head nods. This wasn't the first time strange things had been witnessed in the little lost valley. Of course, a frogman carrying his brood certainly was the most unique story they had heard in a long time. The regulars told the trucker not to get too worked up over the incident, as it could have been the autumn sun playing tricks on their eyes. The reassurance seemed to calm the men. They finished their coffees in a few quick gulps and headed out the door. My mom and the regulars had a good chuckle over the men's story and went on with their day. The following morning, on October 28th, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in Idaho struck the area. The Bora Peak earthquake was a magnitude 7.5 and could be felt hundreds of miles away. It destroyed farm infrastructure, roads and bridges. It even killed 2 children on their way to school when a brick building in Challis, Idaho, collapsed on top of them. It was a horrific and frightening day for everyone in Idaho. Barney Hot Springs was not far from the earthquake's epicenter and did not escape its wrath. A couple passing visitors near the springs that morning watched in amazement as the water drained into the earth, leaving behind a stinking, mucky hole. Minutes later, to their further astonishment, the water came splashing back into the depression, but was now boiling hot. It was a truly bizarre geologic event to see. The boiling stopped immediately after the earthquake ceased, and the water at Barney's quickly cooled. It's now more of a warm springs, having permanently lost about 15 degrees of temperature after the earthquake. The Frogman has been seen a handful of times since that initial sighting, always near Barney's and almost always standing in the road. I like to think the Frogman was just a doting parent getting their babies out of harm's way before the earthquake struck and annihilated everything in the hot springs. Barney Hot Springs is still a widely popular spot for the locals. No one seems too bothered by the idea of sharing the water with a little odd amphibian man and his family. Someone even reintroduced the tropical fish after the boiling incident killed all of them. It remains just one of the many weird stories to come out of the Lost Rivers area of Idaho where I grew up. Please drop a like and subscribe to Eerie Echoes for more horror stories. As always, thank you for watching.